Good morning. Thank you so much. So, a couple of years ago, I got one of those phone calls that you never want to get. It was my mom, and she was calling to tell me that my dad had just been rushed to the hospital. So he was shivering uncontrollably. He had a dangerously high fever, and there was literally nobody who could tell us what was going on. We had no idea what was causing all of this. And so I was completely panicked. You have to sort of picture me. I'm 600 miles away. There's literally nothing that I could do except to wait there for another call. Now, it turned out that my dad had something called endocarditis, which is a very rare and actually potentially very deadly form of infection for the heart's inner lining. So I was terrified that my father was about to die. I was confused by all of the medical terms that people were throwing around, and I didn't understand what any of it meant. And I was angry that all of this felt out of my control. Now, eventually, several weeks later, I was lucky enough to feel a sense of relief when I found out that his treatment had worked and he was going to be okay. So, did you notice some of the words that I used to describe this experience? The first thing I said was I was terrified, right? I was confused. I was angry. Eventually, I was relieved. Now, these don't sound like factual medical terms, do they? Right? My experience of the healthcare system was very, very personal and emotional. In fact, I would argue that there is no industry in the world that is more personal or more emotional than healthcare, because we're talking about our bodies after all, right? This is our ability to function, to breathe, to move, to work, to live, right? Yet there is nothing more impersonal and opaque than healthcare communications. So, what's up with that disconnect? Healthcare is a mashup of science and business and medicine, but we can't forget that our experience of it is emotional, right? There's all of this fear and loss and hope and triumph and uncertainty, and all of this is very messy human stuff. So I would argue that I think it's time for us to collectively boost our communication game, because good storytelling, it saves lives. Now, lest you think that I'm just some sort of copywriter with a messiah complex, good storytelling saves lives. I want to give you a concrete example. So I've spent the past year of my life on an externship from IDEO, working at a company called Omada Health, which is it offers a digital diabetes prevention program that helps people with pre-diabetes adopt healthier long-term habits. Now, pre-diabetes is a condition which is reversible, right? But left unchecked, it can lead to type 2 diabetes, which causes all kinds of nasty complications, not the least of which is death. So, how do you get people to sort of wake up and pay attention and get themselves checked? I can hand you a brochure that looks something like this, and don't worry if you can't read it, there's absolutely no reason that you would want to. Sort of warns you of the dangers of prediabetes and firmly urges you to assess your risk. But if you're like most people, you're probably going to glance at this and toss it away after your eyes glaze over and put it in a pile of stuff that happens to other people. And why wouldn't you? There's absolutely nothing compelling about communications like this, but this is what the healthcare system is pumping out to us all the time. This is just something I found on the internet as an example. Or I could tell you a story. And maybe it's a story about a real person, someone who has experienced the ups and downs of life just like you have. A story that starts out something like this.
I was an automotive engineer, The lifestyle was a very sedentary type lifestyle, and it was all you did was sit in meetings all day. I had a very poor self-image. It was one that was probably hidden by a lot of other things, such as trying to be the comedian or making jokes about how big I was, and it kept me from doing a lot of things.
Now, which of these approaches sort of makes you lean in and get curious, right? Personally, I would much rather let that video of Rodney keep playing and find out what happens to him. But while I've got your attention, you're forming this emotional connection with the content that runs way deeper than any barrage of facts or figures that I could throw out at you ever could. And once I've engaged your heart, and not just your head, you're actually a lot more likely to take action. We're talking about action that could literally save your life. And in case you're curious, Rodney actually, oops, we're missing Rodney here. I don't know why we went backwards. All right, the slides are in a little bit of wrong order, and that's okay. This is action that could literally save your life. And Rodney lost 40 pounds, reduced his risk of diabetes by up to 85%. My point is that stories are way more motivating than statistics can ever be. And great stories aren't just personally motivating on an interpersonal level, they're shareable too. So if a story moves me or engages me, I might forward it to a friend, like all of us do this. We post it on Facebook, we might talk about it at a cocktail party or something like that. And when it comes to public health, when taking action can literally make the difference between saving your life, you can't ask for anything better than that kind of fast-spreading, organic trust. So my tacit endorsement as a living, breathing human being, someone that you might know personally, that's worth more than gold in healthcare. So that's the patient side of things. But I would also argue that storytelling matters in the business-to-business world of healthcare too, and for many of the same reasons. And I'm about to drop a really crazy idea here, so I want everyone to just take a deep breath and get ready. This crazy idea is that business decision makers are people. Blows people's minds, right? Even if businesses, when we go out and we talk to other businesses, we want to pretend that that business, we should talk to them like some sort of stat-spewing robot because they just want the facts. That's all they want to hear. People don't turn off their emotions when they pick up their laptops in the morning and go into the workplace. These are the same people who cry watching sappy movies and they cheer during football matches. The same exact people. Now, of course, in businesses, you have critical minds and they need to see the numbers, and they have bosses who want to understand the business implications of every decision that gets made. But that's not how real decisions get made. Whether or not we want to admit it, real decisions get made when something just feels right. You know that feeling that you get where you're like, yeah, that's what I need to do. That's how real decisions get made. So while the brain is busy rationalizing everything, the heart pulls the trigger. And stories, moving, poignant stories, they shoot straight to the heart. So let's say, for the sake of argument, that you're a human resources professional and I'm a salesperson from Omada Health. And I can show you some god-awful slide that looks like this, that's, got the cost-benefit analysis of implementing our chronic disease program, and it tells you how much money you're going to save, and it'll give you the ROI, and all of this great stuff, and they're going to cost you a lot of money. And this is really important information. I know I'm not in any way pretending that this isn't important. But will these arguments be the ones that are going to convince you to pull the trigger and provide a new benefit to your employees? At this point, your brain is kind of thinking about it. But what have you felt about it? Imagine instead if I put a bunch of stories into that presentation and introduced you to someone like Rodney. And I'm not talking about a composite person like At-Risk Alice, right? With some horrible stock photography with it's still got the stock photography watermark over it. We see this all the time in presentations and you're like, how am I supposed to care about this person? This person doesn't exist. Why should I make my decision based on something like that? I'm talking about a real person instead, like this woman that we met named Jane. So she's an individual with a family and a brighter outlook on life because of the things that she's done with a program like Omada. So suddenly we can describe the intangible benefits of working with us, because you can't stick something like, I want to live long enough to see my granddaughter graduate, on a spreadsheet. And this is the stuff that gets people to stop with their overanalysis and get their heart and soul involved in the conversation. So if all of this sounds a little bit fluffy to you, I want to tell you another story. And it's a story of one of our biggest clients. They're a nationwide retail giant. And they were standing at the edge of a very big decision. So they had offered Omada before in a pilot program, but they needed to convince their senior leadership to actually make a commitment and expand the program nationally. So you'd think they want to go in there armed with a whole bunch of numbers, right, to prove that this stuff is going to work. But what our main client said to us was like, just give me the video. That's all I need, right? And it was a video that went like this.
To see them grow up, to have their families, and have grandkids. Just surprised on, how quick it all went. It's just like I signed up, bam, the scale was coming in, my introductory package was coming in, I was part of a group, the lessons were coming, I was like, oh my, what did I just do? But I'm like, okay, let's do it. My body has gotten used to being active and going for the walks and not eating as much as I used to. You can't restrict yourself from the things that you love, because that's not what the program is about. It's about structuring yourself to still enjoy the things you enjoy, but realize you don't have to go to the extreme. You're human, you make mistakes, you pick yourself back up and you go at it again.
So leadership in the company said yes. I actually heard that a couple of them even cried during the meeting. Score. And in the end, literally thousands more people in this company had access to a program that could save their lives. Now, here's the point in my story where probably a few of you out there are going like, okay, yep, I get it. Tell a nice story, you make some people cry. Let's all just make some beautiful documentaries and go home. But there's a lot more to it than that. Great stories are very deliberately designed, right? Just like products, as Willie was talking about, or processes or technology. And applying this, the principles of human-centered design is a really fantastic way to make sure that you're crafting a story that is both relevant and compelling, and one that is going to motivate people toward action. Now, as you know, one of the most basic tenets of human-centered design is to start every project by talking to the people that you're actually doing the design for and understanding what they need, not just what you want to design, but what do they need. So at IDEO, I worked on a project for an organization called the National Campaign to Prevent Teen and Unplanned Pregnancy, which I had started working with them when they just expanded their mission from preventing just teen pregnancy to young unmarried women ages 18 to 29, which is actually a really vulnerable point in a young woman's life. If you think about it, getting pregnant before you're ready to have a baby when you're 19 or 20 years old, you're probably looking at having to drop out of school, maybe you have to quit your first job. You'd be trying to raise a kid without adequate resources, especially if you're a member of an underserved population. This is a really, really dangerous time for people, and all of this puts moms and kids at very high risk. And I also want to note here that I know that women's reproductive rights kind of a big topic in Poland here right now, so good timing for this. So we went out and we talked to young women in their homes, right, about their lives and what they care about and what they're afraid of and what are all the things that are important to them. And here's one of the things that we learned. There is a lot of misinformation out there about sex and birth control. But by the time you're 19 or 20, nobody wants to admit what they don't know. So they just go about trying to figure things out on their own and pretend like they already know everything. And the sources for good information are few and far between. We actually talked to people and said, well, where do you get information about sex? And they're like, well, I watch pornography. Okay. And the sources for credible information, someone like going to a doctor or going to a more established site on the internet, it feels inaccessible. It feels confusing, and quite frankly, it's just really boring. Not a lot of 19-year-olds are like excited to have conversations with their doctors about birth control. So, we knew that people felt embarrassed about what they didn't know, and we needed to help dispel all the myths that were out there. There's tons and tons of myths about how birth control works, but we couldn't sound too dry or too medical because nobody at that age was going to pay attention. So we needed to design communications to meet these young women where they are. And I want to remind you that is usually never in a place where they're just going like, oh, I want to learn more about my birth control choices, right? We have to break through that barrier. And we needed to do it in a tone and language that people could understand, but in a format that was shareable and honest and funny so that it might stand a chance at living beyond that single viewing. So I'm going to share one example from a series of short films called Fact or Fiction that were part of a much larger program that I'll talk about in a moment. And a little bit of a word of warning. In the US, when I play this to a group of people in their 40s or 50s or 60s, I get a very mixed reaction. So some of the people think it's wonderful, and some of the more conservative people in the audience are horrified. They're absolutely horrified by the tone and the content. And every time that happens, I kind of smile a little inside and think, that's totally okay, because they are not the target audience. No one here in this room is a member of the target audience, and that is the entire point that I'm trying to make about human-centered design and storytelling, and why it is so vitally important in healthcare. Because human-centered design considers the needs of the people that you're designing for, rather than just going along with the biases and assumptions of the people who are creating the design.
My boyfriend's dick is actually too big for a condom. He has like a monster wang. We tried the extra large ones, but he says they still don't fit right. So we just gave up.
I hate to break it to you ladies, but no man's penis is too big for a condom. Condoms are great at preventing STDs, and they come in all sorts of styles. So you just have to find the one that's right for both of you.
Now, what I just showed you is it's a very small part of a much larger campaign called Bedsider that features all kinds of different stories, right? There's animated videos like these. There's real user testimonials where we videotaped real women talking about their experiences with birth control, the good, the bad, and the other. The list goes on and on, but this is the important takeaway, is that this kind of storytelling works. Bedsider's sex-positive storytelling. Sure, this is. Has created a significant and quantifiable difference in the lives of young women. And this is where I'm going to break some of my own storytelling rules and share some pretty impressive stats with you. There was a year-long study that was undertaken by some data-minded folks way smarter than me, and we now know for a fact that women who use Bedsider are way less likely to have a pregnancy scare, less likely to have an unintended pregnancy, and less likely to have had unprotected sex in the prior month. But I want to put these numbers into context for you with just one more real story. I had recently heard from a young woman named Taylor. And before she was introduced to Bedsider, she was having trouble remembering to take her birth control every single day. And that kind of consistency is actually very important. And she wound up getting pregnant. And she was faced with a very difficult choice. So she could either drop out of school at that moment and have her baby, or she could have an abortion. So How do you make a decision like that when you're 19 years old? How do you even face thinking through all of that? So whether you agree with her decision or not, Taylor decided to have an abortion, and this is a fact that she has to live with every day of her life. But since she was introduced to Bedsider and the system's birth control reminders, she says that she has never missed a pill. And she wrote to say how grateful that she is, that she now feels like she has a choice in how she lives her life. So we're talking about real impact in the lives and health of women and children, and all of it started with storytelling. So whether you're trying to convince someone to get tested for prediabetes, or help them make better birth control decisions, or battling any other of the public health epidemics that we are faced with today, the way that you tell your story matters, which means you need to make it personal, you need to make it relevant, and you need to make it human. Thank you.